political to encompass everything that concerns people.
Procura de moderare baronessa di tirannia. Procura de moderare baronessa di tirannia.
Marshal Badoglio triumphantly climaxed his brilliant campaign by this final swoop upon Addis Ababa. With wild enthusiasm, Rome heard the news that Addis Ababa had fallen. Italy hails Mussolini as the modern Caesar.
Signor Gramsci?
Who is it?
Grigliano. Lena.
Oh, Lena, come in.
I hope I'm not disturbing you. It's just I thought, well, I've got a wireless set in my room if you wanted to listen to Signor Mussolini's speech tonight.
No.
I could get it brought in here if that was easier for you.
No. Another day. When there's some music, maybe.
But I thought, I mean, you used to be in Parliament yourself, didn't you?
Yes, it gave me immunity from being impressed by anything Mr. Mussolini has to say about anything. Sit down, Lena. By your accent, you're Calabrian. With a mind of your own, I hope.
I suppose so. Some people seem to think girls from the South haven't got minds at all.
They only want to make you believe that.
It's annoying, though.
You're under attack, so you must defend yourself with what you are. That's maybe not easy to understand. Mr. Mussolini will tell us tonight about our African empire. But you and I, Lena, we hardly make the most convincing emperors.
But just the same, surely we're all Italian.
Eventually. First, you're a Calabrian and a woman. I'm a Sardinian. Italy's not a mother. She needs our consent. Little sermon there. To tell to your own children.
Children? I won't ever have children the way I am.
Well, other people's then. I have two. Didn't you know that? One of them I've never seen. Giuliano.
Where is he?
Moscow, with his mother and his brother Delio. There are pictures on the table if you want to look. I was arrested before Giuliano was born.
So that's why there's usually a policeman outside your door. Because you're a prisoner.
I have what our leader is pleased to call provisional liberty.
That's terrible. I thought it was because you were a VIP.
Well, I saw it all coming. I understood that history doesn't happen by itself. So much work to be done. Empires in Africa are child's play by comparison.
Italia ha finalmente il suo impero. Oggi, 9 maggio, 14° anno dell'era fascista.
In November 1926, nearly 10 years before Mussolini proclaimed his Italian empire in Africa, Antonio Gramsci had been arrested despite immunity as an elected member of parliament. In May 1928, he had appeared with other leading communists before a special tribunal in Rome charged with conspiracy, instigating civil war, and fomenting class hatred. Sentencing Gramsci on June the 4th, the head of the fascist tribunal had declared, "We must prevent this brain from functioning for 20 years. The fascists failed. Since the end of World War II, the authorities at the special prison for the sick at Turi, near Bari in the Italian south, have preserved Gramsci's cell as a kind of shrine to the man whose prison letters and notebooks constitute not only one of the century's most important bodies of political philosophy, but also one of its greatest testimonies to human courage and endurance. Gramsci's very right to write in prison had to be fought for in a protracted legal wrangle. The letters were subject to censorship. The notebooks had to be smuggled out. It was the late 40s before the first selections of his prison writings were published, the 60s before definitive editions revealed the full extent of his achievement. The painter Renzo Galliotti spoke for a whole generation of post-war Italians when he wrote, "The tiny, suffering man with the big bushy hair, intensely working in the dark of his cell, is one of the strongest and most moving images of our time." In his life, Gramsci embodied the watchwords he had made his own: pessimism of the intelligence, optimism of the will. For today and for the world, his legacy is pervasive, an exemplary insistence on the particular and on the importance of popular culture in building popular hegemony, that intellectual and moral leadership which is a precondition of true democracy.
¿Qué significa democracia?
And this means democracy. Not democracy in the sense of parliamentary democracy. It's not that. Neither is it democracy in the sense that European social democrats have developed the concept. But it's democracy just the same. It involves the need for a consensus, an acceptance by the governed of the rules and the world view of the governors. It is here that the great relevance of Gramsci lies, of Gramsci the revolutionary. He is not a social democrat. He is not a liberal democrat. He is a democrat, and one whose writings repeatedly refute the methods of Stalinism.
Nation building needs its names and myths. Post-war Italy has many Piazza Gramscis. But perhaps the most impressive is also one of the most remote, at Ales, Gramsci's birthplace in central Sardinia. Giovanni Lai, a Sardinian trade unionist, was a political prisoner at Turi between 1931 and 33. He remembers Gramsci the man.
I think that the myth that Gramsci was a man, yes, but with a kind of Superman character is something unavoidable. However, as far as I am concerned, he was utterly normal from the human point of view, apart from the fact that he had a physical deformity. He had a hump on his back and a hump on his chest. Other than that, he was a man with a very fine head, with eyes that spoke even when he was silent. His hands were the same. We used to say to him sometimes, jokingly, that he had a pianist hands. Every day, morning and evening, for 2 hours, rain, hail, or shine, he came down into the courtyard, the so-called courtyard of the prison, where the detainees, communists in this case, used to meet. He wanted to be with other people. He wanted to talk and to listen. He was a great one for getting discussion going, Gramsci.
Chicken shit. Eh? Chicken shit. A load of that would make all the difference.
Aye, well.
Get the chicken shit down ere the first frost comes, for tomatoes as firm as virgin's bums. You've never heard that, Giovanni?
Can't say I have.
Oh, it'll be true, too. The old folks knew what they were talking about, in these matters at least. Agricultural science, no doubt, could provide the precise chemical formulation. The proverb's easier. Or am I just being sentimental?
We're all entitled to a bit of that now and again, I reckon. The likes of us especially.
No, we're not. The likes of us especially not. Sentimentality debilitates. It's It's like treating the priest to a flask of wine every weekend for 40 years in the hopes of a happier end. All very pleasant and sociable. Trouble is, it costs a packet. And the poor bugger who's paying the bill is all the more terrified when his time finally does come.
What about the priest?
He's all right. He dies fat. Comrade Lai, you don't have very much to say for yourself.
I'm a worker.
No, that's not good enough. You've a chip on your shoulder and a block in your brain, a typical Sardinian.
Come on.
You think, why should the mumblings of an illiterate goat herd interest the Honourable Deputy Gramsci, who's an educated man?
That's a bit strong.
If it gets your dandruff, it'll do.
What would you expect?
The limit. And beyond, from every man, plus himself.
Hey, do you mind the time, back in Sardinia, in 24, when you came into that cafe in Cagliari where I was working, up in the Piazza Ieni, and you sat down at one of my tables and I served you? That was a big thing for me.
Touched the hem of my garment, did you?
Well, I better get on.
Sorry. It's just that dumb wonder doesn't get us anywhere. I remember this prisoner at Palermo, not a political, some kind of bandit. He just couldn't believe that I was Gramsci. Came and asked me. I was somebody famous, and therefore I had to be a giant, 6 feet tall at least, instead of this half-dead dwarf in chains. Didn't say another word, either. Have you come across Rousseau at all in your reading?
Man is born free and is everywhere in chains.
It would be nice if it was as simple as that. Shake off our chains, and we'll all grow like flowers.
Are you not just playing with words there?
We've got to be careful that words don't play with us. What if we took a more organic view? What if the chains were part of us?
I don't follow.
I'm talking about our culture. What made us in the first place? To grow, we've got to absorb that, understand it. And of course, a bit of fertilizer helps.
I still don't see what you're driving at.
Yes, you do. Instead of putting us intellectuals up on a pedestal, think of us as chicken shit. Good for the ground. Or ought to be. The best of Lenin to get the best out of Lai. As for poor old Nino, he can hardly even walk anymore without somebody to help him.
Another of Gramsci's Tory comrades, indeed the man who was to help him smuggle out the notebooks, was Gustavo Trombetti from Bologna.
Arrivato a Turri, dopo un giorno di...
On arrival at Turi, after a day in isolation, which was the usual practice in the prison, I was sent to the political section and allocated cell number 11, which was directly opposite Gramsci's. When I got to know this, I managed to go over to the spy hole in Gramsci's cell door and peep through without being seen by the guard. I saw a not very tall man standing by a table with his knee up on a stool and one hand leaning on the table. He was either reading or writing, I couldn't say which.
4 ideas have come to me so far. 1. Research on the history of Italian intellectuals. Do you remember that very superficial piece of mine about southern Italy and the importance of Benedetto Croce? Well, I'd like to expand fully the thesis I only touched on then. 2. A study of comparative linguistics, and what could be more disinterested than that? 3. Darling Mama, if writing is such a painful business for you, dictate the letter to Grazietta, or Meyer, or Terracina, and then just add your signature. That would make it easier for you, and you'd be able to write more often. I would like Grazietta to tell me what the following categories of people eat in a week. A family of 1, day laborers, 2, sharecroppers, 3, shepherds, 4, craftsmen, cobblers or blacksmiths. How many times do they eat meat in a week, and how much? What do they use to make soup? How much oil or fat do they put in? How much pasta? How many vegetables? And when you get the chance, send me some of these Sardinian street songs. Do they still hold the St. Constantine Day Festival at Sedillo? And the St. Palmiero Festival? Do they still have the flag with the 4 Moors carried around?
Contrade sa prepotenza e incomincia sa pazienza, in su popula mancare, in su popula mancare. In su popula mancare, baronessa di tirannia. Procurate, procurate, procurate moderare, procurate moderare.
The song is 18th century, a litany against injustice and the tyranny of the landowners. The dance is even older. Modern Sardinia, like the Scottish Highlands or the Irish West, remains a battleground between a cherished sense of identity and economic disadvantage. Poverty, unemployment, escape through immigration, and escapism into a romanticized past are all endemic. So also is a spirit of resistance. If sometimes even today it self-destructs in banditry, it also ensures that the more dogged struggles continue. Carthaginians, Romans, Turks, Spaniards, and Piedmontese, all in their time laid harsh, uneasy claim to Sardinia. In 1861, the island became part of the fledgling Italian state, but locked thereby into the tariff systems and central control of 19th century nationalism. For the peasants, the new Italy merely swapped feudal oppression for what they called the continents. And yet, for all the hardships underlying its seductive physical beauty, Sardinia was a society a far cry from what an English tourist called D.H. Lawrence described as lost between Africa and Europe and belonging to nowhere, never having belonged to anywhere, as if it had never really had a fate, no fate, left outside of time and history. Gramsci grew up in the small town of Ghilarza on the Barigadu Plateau, in relative prosperity at first. His father, Francesco, a mainlander of Albanian descent, had come to Sardinia as a government official and married Giuseppina Marches, a local girl of good family. There were 7 children from the marriage. Antonio, born in 1891, was the 4th. But Sardinia in the 1890s was rife with political graft. In 1898, Francesco Gramsci was arrested and jailed on dubious fraud charges, plunging his family into near destitution. Somehow, socially outcast and laughed at, they managed. Years later, in a letter to his sister, Grazietta, Gramsci was to pay tribute to their mother. Had she been another woman than she was, perhaps none of us would be alive today. And somehow, despite poor schooling interrupted by the need to earn money, the boy Gramsci achieved an education. Enough to take him in 1908, age 17, to the State College in the island capital, Cagliari. He lodged with one of his brothers, Gennaro, who had returned from national service in Turin, full of the new socialism. Cagliari itself was restive with the usual Sardinian complaint. Former communist member of the European Parliament, Umberto Cardia.
It should be said, as far as this is concerned, that during the adolescent phase of Gramsci's youth, which he spent here in Cagliari, at college in Cagliari, he began to develop autonomist sentiments, that is a demand which united him with the rest of our population, the people of Sardinia, a demand for self-government. The other element, which was born here, may be defined as Gramsci's social awareness or class consciousness, because at that time, around the turn of the century, Sardinia was emerging with difficulty from the European economic crisis of the last years of the 19th century. It was facing currents of social rebellion in every part of the island.
As a boy, Gramsci had absorbed much of the popular culture of an island that had never been independent, never fully subjugated, and many of its attitudes. He had thrilled to the exploits of bandits as legendary as Robin Hood and a lot more recent. But adolescence led him to see in the violence of banditry and the never-ending cycle of vendetta only the mirror image of a Sardinian hopelessness. Peasant miseries were of anything surpassed by the appalling conditions of industrial salt workers in the southwest of the island. And the miners' strikes of the early 1900s, particularly at Bujero in 1904, were desperate rebellions put down with the same lethal savagery that the authorities applied to their anti-bandit campaigns. In Cagliari, separatist journals called for the Continentals to be thrown into the sea. Gramsci made his own first journalistic sallies, becoming known to the police and receiving at least one appeal for moderation from his father, by now home in Ghilarza from jail, but a broken man.
I think it may be said that the Sardinian roots of Gramsci follow him like a shadow throughout the course of his life. They were continually developed at higher and higher levels, but they were never lost. It's a link that was never lost. I think we can actually say that without deeply understanding these links, the real Gramsci, the authentic Gramsci, can never be known. Never.
Non si potrà conoscere mai.
There is another aspect of Gramsci's Sardinian childhood, without which the man cannot be understood. In the old family home at Ghilarza, now a museum, the boy's bedroom was preserved much as it was, but an infant fall had left him sickly, undersized, and increasingly hunchbacked. A coffin kept ready for him till he was 14 is lost. So is the harness they used to hang him in.
For a very long time, I believed it was impossible that I should ever be loved. My physical condition was so feeble, I was forced to make so many sacrifices that I became convinced I was a burden, an intruder in my own family. These are things one doesn't forget so easily. They leave far deeper marks than one would suspect. Dearest Mama, I take it the weather has been very bad in Sardinia and has deprived people of the will to write. Tell Teresina that I'm grateful to her and her children for thinking of sending me canali violets and some bulbs of wild cyclamen. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to receive these gifts. It would go against the regulation which lays it down that prison life must retain its punitive character. So no violets, no cyclamen. No cheeky little devil out of rebellious nature to tickle my nostrils with its scent or delight my eyes with the colors of its flowering. Here I've got warm clothes, cigarettes, books, writing materials. All these years ago, when I first arrived in Turin, I hadn't enough of any of these things. That first winter, freezing river fogs and a coat that wouldn't do a dog in Cagliari. I didn't speak for several months. When I had to, the words came out all mixed up. It was like a long dream, with a spider sucking out my brain, as though humanity was ceasing to exist for me, the links snapping one by one. In Turin, it was people, workers, students, who restored me to humanity. Almost in spite of myself. People, not the people, which is an abstraction.
2,500 le pere! 2,500 le pere al puro, signore!
2,500, dai! 500 arancio buono!
Today, Turin is a thriving mix of Piedmontese and second-generation immigrants whose fathers were sucked into its factories from the south, the Mezzogiorno, during Italy's northern boom years of the 50s and early 60s. It was a very different city when Gramsci arrived there in 1911 as a university student. The steel and car manufacturing industries from which the corporate giant Fiat was later to emerge were just establishing themselves, and with them, a Turin working-class consciousness as vigorous and self-confident as any in Europe. Turin, capital Piedmont, had been an engine room of the liberal Risorgimento and unification of Italy. Earlier, Piedmont had been one half of a kingdom whose other half, more colony than partner, was Sardinia. The solid elegance of Turin had in part been paid for by the exploitation of Sardinian resources, and the city maintained into the 20th century its influence over the island. Young Sardinians were recruited as policemen and soldiers for the Piedmontese garrisons. Even the scholarship that Gramsci won to Turin University was named after a former Piedmontese king, Carlo Alberto. Gramsci biographer, Senator Giuseppe Fiori.
Gramsci, a 20 anni.
At the age of 20, Gramsci left Sardinia for Turin. At that time, his basic position could be described as Sardinian radicalism, of support for independence and the Sardinian Republic. He was to write, "How often I thought into the sea with the Continentals." That is, drive out of Sardinia all the Italians who were not Sardinians. In Turin, he discovered the reality of a society divided into classes, the bosses and the workers. It was then that the idea dawned on Gramsci that not whole mainland Italy was hostile to Sardinia, but that there were common interests between the lower classes in Sardinia, the peasants, and the producing class in Turin, in Piedmont, that is, the workers. At this point, Gramsci began to reflect on the need for an alliance between the peasants of southern Italy and the workers.
At university, despite poverty and chronic ill health, Gramsci stood out as a brilliant student. His professors foresaw a pioneering career in philology. Gramsci himself, maturing in a hothouse of political debate, had other ideas. Years later, he put them at their simplest to his son, Delio.
Darling Delio, go on writing to me about whatever interests you at school. I get the impression you like history, just as I did at your age, because it's about living people. And surely everything that concerns people, everybody in the world, insofar as they unite in society and strive together to improve themselves, surely that must interest you more than anything else.
There was a contrast between the working class and the intellectual life of the university which Gramsci was attending. The university, of course, was a very serious-minded place. You could say that this was the period of studies, of encounters, of discovery of the new socialism, of friendships, things which perhaps could only occur in Turin.
Reserved and yet demanding, Gramsci made only a few real friends in Turin, but good ones. Palmiro Togliatti, architect of the modern Italian Communist Party, had come from Sardinia on the same scholarship as Gramsci. Piero Sraffa was to be, from exile in Cambridge, a kind of intellectual lifeline for Gramsci during his prison years. The brilliant liberal journalist Piero Gobetti, Paolo's father, who was to be beaten to death by a fascist squad, was a later companion on long nocturnal walks.
We used to walk till all the hours through the city streets, talking, arguing. Only a few night people stopped to peer at us. We used to forget ourselves completely, overflowing with impassioned feelings, outrageous suggestions, great gales of laughter, and wild gallops into the realm of the impossible.
World War I changed everything. Italy entered on the side of the Allies in the spring of 1915, but the glorious affair demanded by nationalist zeal was soon floundering among the snows of the Austrian border. 500,000 workers and peasants died, while production and the profits of Italian industries soared. A rising pro-war demagogue, Benito Mussolini, was expelled from the Socialist Party. Gramsci abandoned his university career and threw himself into journalism, his ever fiercer socialist polemics redeeming an earlier enthusiasm for Mussolini.
C'era una fortissima
The pacifist and neutralist feeling in Turin was very strong. When the Socialist Party shifted position with the famous phrase, no collaboration but no boycott, this aroused a deeply felt negative reaction. I believe this experience was vital to the development of Gramsci's thought, because there really was tension, which went beyond being merely anti-war. Obviously, everything possible was done to destroy the organization of the working class by sending some of the members up to the front line. But they had to be replaced, in some cases, by women. In this area, the women were not inferior to the men. I would say it was a very significant period. And I think that the presence of Gramsci, not as an organizer, but as the political conscience of this period, was extremely important.
News of the fall of the Russian Tsarists in February 1917 reached Italy through a heavy screen of censorship. In April, Gramsci predicted the coming of a Russian socialist regime. By August, Lenin's name was being chanted in Turin almost as much as in the streets of Moscow. The Bolshevik triumph in October, combined with military disaster at Caporetto, to create in Italy, too, a climate of revolution. An anarchist May Day celebration in the hills above Turin. May Day celebrations were one thing, but with the end of the war came waves of spontaneous riots and strikes all over the north of Italy. The very chaotic strength of working class and peasant demands made leadership as difficult as it was essential. A range of factions, from reformists to Enrico Malatesta's anarchists, sought to out-demonstrate one another in Turin, Milan, and the other flashpoints. On May Day 1919, the first edition of Ordine Nuovo, New Order, appeared in Turin, edited by Gramsci and a group that included Togliatti and Umberto Terracini. Ordine Nuovo urged its readers, educate yourselves because we need all your intelligence. Agitate because we need all your enthusiasm. Organize because we need all your strength. Piero Gobetti, though not a socialist, was Ordine Nuovo's theater critic. Gobetti wrote of the 30-year-old Gramsci, "The brain has overwhelmed the body, the voice has a destructive edge, its irony turning quickly to venomous sarcasm. His rebellion is sometimes resentment, sometimes the deeper rage of the Sardinian unable to free himself from age-old slavery, save by infusing the most tyrannical energy into his commands and propaganda."
It is interesting, on the other hand, to observe Gobetti, who was middle class and an intellectual, as were the students who had demonstrated in favor of the war and who could have been the very same students who were later in favor of fascism. But unlike them, Gobetti was clearly aware of the seriousness of the workers' movement, because it was no longer a movement which limited itself to wage demands or to revolutionary rhetoric.
Puramente rivendicativo o massimalista.
In the factories, a system of internal commissions or workers' committees representing shop floor interests had been permitted during the war. Little more than mouthpieces for a mildly reformist, collaborative trade union leadership. But Gramsci and others saw them as the key to genuinely democratic post-war workers' control. Battista Santillar, then a young activist, remembers.
When we won the internal commissions, Gramsci took a much greater interest in the factories. He made a careful study of what the internal commission was, what its function was, its regulations inside the factory. And he suggested a series of modifications, which were of great assistance to us. He gave us advice on various matters, big and small, and he helped us to find something new. And it was from this that the idea of the factory councils emerged. In other words, the internal commissions had to face up to the very serious problems of the post-war period and of the industrial developments that there had been during the war.
Ordine Nuovo's message of education, organization, and alliance between workers and peasants was echoing up to a middle class increasingly fearful that the old order was breaking down. Fiat Company chairman, the autocratic Giovanni Agnelli, made his own assumptions.
Agnelli, che non conosceva Gramsci di nome, ma non di persona.
Agnelli knew Gramsci by name, but he didn't know him personally. He knew about him through some of his friends who described him. There was one, for example, who was in permanent contact with Gramsci. Agnelli himself didn't know him, so he was convinced that these articles published in the review, Ordine Nuovo, were written by an engineer in his employment. Gramsci, when he heard this story, laughed and said, "Look, what a splendid engineer you have got here."
In September 1920, a wage dispute at Fiat and elsewhere escalated into full-scale armed occupation of the factories, with workers rumored to be turning their lathes to weapons manufacture. For some, it was the beginning of the revolution. For the Ordine Nuovo group, it was disastrously premature. Battista Santiago was a member of the factory council which met during the occupation in Agnelli's boardroom.
E noi legati invece al gruppo Ordine Nuovo, cioè
in the Ordine Nuovo group, in other words, that part of FIOM, the Metal Workers' Union, which supported the factory councils, we were still a minority. At the elections, we were still a minority. At the time of the occupation of the factories, we became the leaders, because there was no general agreement. We did no more than tolerate the occupation of the factories. Why was this? Because we understood that the lack of seriousness in the preparations meant that we were heading for a defeat of the working class.
After 4 weeks, Union moderates accepted promises of reform from a liberal government anxious to avoid a bloodbath and unable to do nothing any longer. The militants were isolated and the occupations ended tamely enough. The promised reforms never reached the statute book.
E allora lì fu un periodo molto grave.
This was a very serious, uneasy moment because of the political crisis we were facing. And it was this that led to the famous article by Gramsci in Ordine Nuovo entitled "Workers in Flesh and Blood." It was a symptom of the situation at that time. It was a very serious defeat for us, and we were aware that it was a political and trade union defeat whose effects would remain for some time. And behind all this, of course, was the spectre of fascism.
In the months that followed, fascist squads all over northern Italy exacted their revenge on the socialist organizations that had rejected Mussolini and challenged the nation's oneness. In Turin, the offices of Ordine Nuovo were wrecked, and more than offices. In January 1921, the Italian Socialist Congress at Livorno split in bitter recrimination. The Communist Party of Italy was born, with Gramsci a founding member. But he had his doubts. In his newspaper, he acclaimed it. Just 2 years later, he was to describe the split as the greatest single victory won by the forces of reaction. Fiat's Lingotto factory in Turin is today an abandoned architectural dinosaur. In the 20s, it was one of the wonders of the industrial world, rising out of a graveyard of working-class hopes and the kind of law and order that fascism could deliver.
That story of yours the other day, the point was 5-year plans, you said.
An old Sardinian folktale.
Well, if it had to be a 50-year plan.
Sounds even more tedious.
No, I'm being serious. I've been thinking, when this is all over, I might go back to Sardinia and try and do something there. Nothing heroic, I'm not a high flyer, but I think I could do something. Help stop the rot, at least.
You mean as an organizer?
Yes, I'd rather that than some factory in the mainland.
You don't fancy America? Thousands do.
Ah, you're just winding me up again.
No, Giovanni, I'm listening.
Well, what I wanted to ask was, I mean, 5-year plans are all very well when you're in control, but when you're not, it's an uphill struggle all your life. How do you keep your perspective when the end's never in sight?
Faith would be too religious a word. Discipline? Your next question would be, what kind of discipline?
Oh, I can accept discipline. I can discipline myself. But you know better than I do that there's guys in here believe the revolution's just over the wall. The morning after the fascist collapse. Tomorrow or next week at the latest.
And won't hear a word to the contrary. But you don't believe that.
Not just because it's the party line I don't. These guys are going to break their hearts.
Or get shot. Stiffened. Dead or alive.
You know, there was a bloke the other day told me the entire history of the revolution in China before it had happened. He was that certain.
But did he know anything about what they do on feast days in a Chinese village? Giovanni, we could have done with you in Turin. You and a lot more like you. You talk about an uphill struggle, that's when we faced the mountain. We hadn't explained enough, we hadn't organized enough. We were desperate for action, but we had much more than songs and flags.
Next time.
As you say. But as you also say, it could be long enough in coming. I'll tell you what we're like, us revolutionaries. We're like a team of engineers who've designed a locomotive, and it's brilliant. Powerful, aerodynamically perfect, 100 miles an hour along the track.
But it still doesn't run in time, right?
Right. Why not?
Because the railwaymen are a bunch of lazy, incompetent southerners.
Yes, exactly. You see, this locomotive of ours has got absolutely everything to pull behind it. The whole weight of humanity, different levels of education and development, peasant bits of history which were once the best we could do, wheelbarrows and wooden plows, superstition and prejudice, the lot.
So it's back to the drawing board?
Some of us will never be away from it. Meanwhile, we're here just cleaning our weapons. Can you sing at all, comrade?
No?
Yes. I've never had the voice myself. I'll tell you, though, if I had been a singer, I'd have been a bloody good one. You know that? It used to be a children's song from the north. It's funny, these northern bastards have all the best tunes, too.
On October 28, 1922, came the stage-managed fascist march on Rome. 2 days later, the Italian king asked Mussolini to form a government. A civilian suit rather than a black shirt uniform was Il Duce's pledge of respectability. Gramsci was already in Moscow, a delegate among the audience in this rare piece of film shot at the May Congress of the Communist International. The boy from the Sardinian backwoods had arrived on the revolutionary world stage, and with Lenin's specific approval. But he was also now effectively an exile. Amadeo Bordiga, who had accompanied Gramsci to Moscow, was arrested along with other party leaders on his return home. Togliatti struggled for ascendancy within what was left of the communist organization in Italy. Life in Moscow for Gramsci, for all the creativity and confidence of the young socialist republic, was more demanding than stimulating. His health and nerves at the point of breakdown, he was persuaded to spend the latter half of 1922 resting at the Serebriani Bor sanatorium on the edge of the city. He was to return from sanatorium a different man, in his 32nd year, in love for the first and only time in his life.
I've been going over it all again in my mind, from that first day I saw you and felt so timid. Yes, you made me feel timid. I smile even now as I remember it. Until the day you went away on foot, and I went with you as far as the main road through the forest, and stood motionless there for so long, watching you grow smaller and smaller on your way back to the wide and terrible world.
They met while she was visiting a younger sister at the sanatorium. Julia Schucht was 5 years Gramsci's junior. Her parents, Russians of Jewish Scandinavian extraction had spent the last years of the Tsarist regime in exile in Siberia and Rome, where their numerous family had grown up. They had left behind in Rome another daughter, Tatiana, who would devote her life totally to Gramsci during his years in prison. Julia and the two children, Dilio and Giuliano, were never to make the journey from Moscow to Turi.
I have permission to wear this, but have I the figure?
It suits you.
Not so well as a smile on your face suits you, Tanya.
Thank you.
It makes me feel as though you're taking better care of yourself than you are. If you smiled more, I wouldn't worry so much about you. I think I've more unworn pullovers than I've years to live.
I wish you wouldn't say that kind of thing, Nino. It brings bad luck.
Grandmother. So, when did you last hear from Julia?
Last month.
Her sister does better than her husband.
She isn't well, you know that. And she's so highly strung. Writing's difficult for her.
Julia's the Stradivarius and you're the peasant fiddle, eh?
I think she's very afraid.
What of?
Well, it isn't easy bringing up two small children on your own.
How are they?
They're fine. Delio has a parrot. He's teaching it to talk.
Russian?
Yes. I suppose it will be Russian. Giuliano, Ulick, keeps asking where his papa is.
Julia tells him the truth, I hope.
He's very young.
But they never told me when my father was in prison. He was the one I found it hard to forgive when he came home. Well, that's fine. What should we talk about now, then?
Nino.
I can't understand why Julia does this to me. She can't be that ill if she manages to write to you, and things can't be that bad in Moscow. She's got her father. She's got the party to help. Friends in high places, that's how the novelists put it, no?
She has her pride, remember?
Too much to confide in her husband. Tatiana, it is more than a year since I've heard from your sister direct.
She's not well, Nino. She's seeing a specialist.
Oh, a psychoanalyst.
Yes.
Each of us should be our own psychoanalyst. It's a duty. I told her that.
Not everybody's as strong as you. You must make allowances. It's you Julia's scared of.
You're making this up.
She told me that.
Inside my head, there's a laugh going on and on like a migraine.
Nino, please.
It's all right. I learned to live with it long ago. The other kids at home in Galatza used to shun me for the way I was. Then they took to throwing stones at me till one day I threw stones back at them. The fear and shock on their faces. And I exulted. The laugh went ringing round inside my head. Thought it would never stop. The meaning of that laugh, Tanya, my dear, is loneliness. Triumphant and corrosive loneliness. Can't Julia, of all people, understand that?
I do everything I can, don't I?
And in return, you get to choose my parts. Jesus Christ, Gandhi, the Count of Monte. It's fine, Tanya. I understand.
Do you?
Years earlier, before his imprisonment, Gramsci had seen for himself the blissful dawn of revolution made reality in the Soviet Union. Industrial and agricultural development had been matched by a tremendous program of education. But that was the Soviet Union. By the end of 1923, Gramsci was in Vienna, closer to Italy, running a communist information bureau and planning a new newspaper. It should, he proposed, be called L'Unità, Unity, because it means something to the workers, and because I believe we must lay special stress on the southern question, in which the problem of worker-peasant relations is also territorial, an aspect of the national question. In the Italian general election of April 1924, Gramsci was returned a communist deputy and felt safe, under parliamentary immunity from arrest, to leave Vienna for Rome. Just 2 months later, Giacomo Matteotti, parliamentary leader of the socialist opposition to Mussolini, was murdered by a hit squad led by a member of Mussolini's own staff. The ensuing condemnation shook Mussolini badly, but he emerged stronger than ever, his complicity less certain than the impotence of the opposition.
Quando Gramsci fu arrestato.
When Gramsci was arrested at the beginning of November 1926, he was a lawfully democratically elected member of parliament. He was sent into internal exile. In the meantime, during November, the fascists invented the so-called special law for the defense of the state, which was a fascist law for the defense of fascism. This law had a retrospective character, so that Gramsci was arrested once again, sent to detention in Milan, and then committed to one of the special tribunals without there being any specific charge laid against him. He was not accused of any crime.
Specifico, non era imputato di reato.
In a crushing series of journeys up and down the length of the Italian peninsula, Gramsci was transported from jail to jail for 18 months between his first arrest and his trumped-up show trial in Rome. There was a period on Ustica, a tiny island off the Sicilian coast, so remote that Gramsci and his fellow detainees are credited with the introduction of toothpaste. His fragile health deteriorated. The slow fascist process of letting him die had begun, but his mental faculties remained as sharp as ever. He was seeing the mainland South, the Mezzogiorno, whose awakening he set so much store by for the first time.
For half an hour, they went through all the moves, one after another. The weapons were simple. Spoons rubbed against a wall to leave whitewash marks on clothing. Sicilians against Apulians, Apulians against Calabrians. A grandiose, unforgettable scene, the revelation of a complex underworld with its own passions, points of view, code of honor, and cast iron hierarchy. Now you know how I spend my time when I'm not reading. I ponder all these things, analyze them minutely until my head spins. Everything that happens around me, everything that I'm able to see, becomes of exceptional interest. I keep myself under control, of course, so that I don't succumb to that monomania characteristic of prison psychology. A little ironical sprite, brimming with humor, follows me everywhere and is an endless help.
On July 19th, 1928, Gramsci arrived at Turi to become prisoner number 7047.
The head of the fascists had decided that he wanted to stop Gramsci's brain from working for 20 years. And so, after being sentenced, Gramsci was sent to the prison at Turi di Bari because he was ill. However, as is well known, even if his health was not altogether ideal, Gramsci's brain did continue to work.
I haven't lost a certain inventive power, in the sense that everything important I read leads me to think, how could I write an article on this subject? I imagine a racy beginning and ending, and a chain of irresistible arguments in between, like so many straight lefts in my opponent's eye. But I don't write down such irresponsible outbursts, of course. Real work would need documentation, and require to be substantiated by a period of rethinking in a big library. It should also be borne in mind that the rigorous scholarly habits I picked up at university have left me with a somewhat excessive load of methodological scruples.
Convicted for illegal political activities in Bologna, Gustavo Trombetti was sent to Turi in 1933.
A un certo momento, Gramsci,
Gramsci, at one point, set up a kind of clandestine school in prison, and in the course of this brought forward ideas which today would be called social democratic. Social democratic isn't quite the right word here, but there were observations, assertions of his, which were interpreted in this way.
Gramsci insisted that it was inconceivable that fascism would collapse in Italy following an armed uprising by the people. If that had happened in the Soviet Union, in Tsarist Russia, it was due to a combination of circumstances which did not exist in Italy. We had to develop policies in keeping with the historical, social and cultural situation in our own country.
In any case, these matters caused a great deal of tension between Gramsci and the others, so much so that things took a very nasty turn. For a start, a lot of comrades would have nothing to do with Gramsci and wouldn't even speak to him. Indeed, one day he was sitting on a block of stone near a low wall, and from the other side of the wall, someone threw a rock, a really big rock. It landed just next to him. But if it had struck him on the head, it would have done him a very, very serious injury.
Obviously, the majority of Gramsci's comrades remained on friendly terms, as did some of the other prisoners, though with a degree of hesitation. However, the practice of studying together came to an end. Apart from anything else, the prison governors stepped in. In this connection, some of the comrades thought that we should always oppose anything laid down by the regulations. If a rule said that no more than 3 of us could meet together, we should simply ignore it. Say that we could not take the exercise work on our own. Gramsci maintained that there was no point in banging our heads against a brick wall, because the wall would remain standing, while our heads would end up shattered.
I hardly sleep at all, and feel overcome by a terrible lethargy. Not even reading appeals to me. As they say in Sardinia, I walk up and down the cell like a beetle that doesn't know where to go and die. I find myself plagued by a seemingly permanent condition, which I can only sum up as a sort of evaporation of the mental faculties.
However, reading carefully, let's say between the lines of what Gramsci wrote, it was possible at times to see what he was driving at. For example, this business of some people in prison imagining that Italy was a powder keg, that there was a kind of revolutionary situation. Gramsci simply did not believe it. And I agreed with Gramsci. After all, I had just come from the outside, and I knew that things were different.
Early in 1933, Mussolini vetoed further negotiation by the Italian ambassador in Moscow on behalf of the Vatican over a proposed exchange between Gramsci and a group of priests imprisoned in the Soviet Union. That same year, Mussolini visited the former socialist stronghold of Turin.
La vittoria è per noi, per I primi!
At the Lingotto factory, he was welcomed by the Fiat chairman, Giovanni Agnelli himself. With his usual theatrical sense of place and occasion, Il Duce proclaimed the totalitarian consensus of the working population of Italy. The triumph of fascism seemed complete.
Abbiamo oggi, come non mai, il consenso totalitario di tutto il popolo lavoratore italiano.
Thought I told you I can't smoke these anymore. They're too strong.
But I thought they
Tatiana, I'll come straight to the point. I very seriously considered refusing to see you today. You wrote directly to Mussolini about me without my authority.
I only asked for a proper doctor to come and examine you. You want that yourself, don't you?
You wrote without my authority.
Please, Nino, listen to me. We knew how much better...
Oh, who's we this time?
Your brother and I, Carlo. You were so much more yourself for a while. And there seemed a chance of getting out in exchange for the Russian police. When that fell through, there seemed no alternative.
If I'm not going to rot to death here, eh? I'm not afraid to say it. Well, the rot's well started, no? That much is clear. And tell me, who was it put the mockers on the exchange deal anyway?
Mussolini.
Exactly. And Stalin no doubt has bigger fish to fry than this poor sardine, to say no more than that. Togliatti will be wringing his hands. Meanwhile, dear old Benito gets a letter from Miss Schucht. Please let Nino go. Your hospitality isn't agreeing with him. Christ. He must have savored that one. Remember, he wanted to stop this from functioning for 20 years. Well, he's not going to manage it. Guard, I want to go back to my cell.
You can't just crawl away like a wounded bear.
Well, not a bear, Tanya. Not a vegetable either, not yet anyway. Pessimism of the intelligence, optimism of the will. Nice formula, isn't it? All right, there is one thing I'm scared of. That my will weakens till it's no longer able to serve my intelligence. But until that time, I will not ask for favors, and I will not have favors asked on my behalf.
But you have a legal right to proper medical attention. It's in the code.
The individual has the right. A sister-in-law asks for favors.
Sister? That's all I am to you, Nina.
The truth about prison is that feelings go dead on both sides of the wall. Like frostbitten fingers, better to cut them off before they go gangrenous. I've been thinking I should offer Julia her freedom. Really, I think it would be just as well. It happens with long-term prisoners quite often. The women make new lives for themselves. What if I asked you to put it to her?
Oh, no. You'd be your own torturer. You seem to enjoy it.
Verdi would have loved all this. It's a pity we can't keep it going. You know, your sister came into my life like sunrise on a mountaintop. Everything was suddenly warm and visible. There I was, a revolutionary, but sterile, reducing everything to a matter of cold, merely mathematical calculation. And then with Julia, through Julia, I had my glimpse of reality. How rich and warm and difficult life is. Now, clearly, the sun shining isn't much use to me.
I sometimes think you must be capable of cannibalism.
Probably. And therefore also perfectly capable of recognizing moral suicide, which is what any special appeal for clemency amounts to. Promise me, Tanya, that in future you'll spend as much time thinking as feeling.
If Gramsci was physically trapped by fascism, he was intellectually marginalized by Stalinism, as the brutal narrowness of the party line was enforced in the early 30s, reaching even the inmates of foreign prisons. It has been said of Mussolini that in letting Gramsci perish, he was only doing a job that Stalin might have done more quickly. By the middle of 1933, Gramsci was requesting, strictly in accordance with his rights, independent medical assessment.
There were 2 doctors in the prison. They were the GPs from the town, but probably they weren't even up to treating him, because it's quite likely that he had some rare disease. Who knows? Be that as it may, the fact was that at a certain point he was unable to walk anymore. When he wanted to get to his feet, he had to be supported. He couldn't stand by himself. Another thing, He said that there were times when he felt banging in his skull, banging that seemed to come up from below, like blows from a sledgehammer, as he put it. When this came on, he would lose consciousness.
Oh, Christ, not again. Easy, easy. You're all right now.
Is he going to die?
Why don't you ask your bloody bosses about that?
I'm Sardinian too, like.
Jesus Christ.
I don't want him to die.
Well, if he does, that's just something you're going to have to live with. If you want to make yourself useful, why don't you see if you can't get the doctor?
It's more than my job's worth. You've got to realize that. I'm not allowed to leave you here alone with him.
What? You think he's going to get up off this bed, walk out the door and start the revolution?
The priest was here.
No. No. What's more to the point, the doctor wasn't either.
Tell the priest I can feel it. I can't see it, but I can feel it.
There now. That's better.
You're not the priest.
No, it's me, Nino Trombetti. From Bologna. Gustavo.
Trombetti, good man. Where's the priest gone? I want to tell him something.
There, does that feel good?
You're only here because you think you can trap me.
No, Nino, you're mistaken. It's me, Trombetti.
Holy water, my arse. You can't scare me. History is immortality. Each and every one of us, whether we like it or not. I can prove it.
Not now, though. You've proved enough already.
Because life is better than nothing. Always. Always. Always.
In November 1933, Gramsci learned that he was to be transferred from Turi to a private clinic where, though still under surveillance, he would at least have better medical attention. He had already filled 21 notebooks, the equivalent of over 1,000 printed pages, with essays and sketches of essays on history, Marxist philosophy, language, literature, social structures, and popular culture. In his own phrase, everything that concerns people. His jailers regarded his writing cynically, as a kind of harmless pastime. Gramsci intended it für ewig, for always, not for it to end up on some prison garbage fire.
Difatti, a un certo momento Gramsci mi fece.
At a certain point, Gramsci gave me a sign and began speaking in Sardinian to the guard, who was also Sardinian. And then he positioned himself between me and the guard. The guard was sitting behind his desk, and Gramsci managed to get himself in between us. At that moment, I took the bundle of notebooks, put them in the trunk, and covered them with other things. Then the trunk was closed, sealed, and sent off at Gramsci's expense to his sister-in-law Tatiana's house in Rome. From there, the notebooks found their way to Moscow.
Fearful of demonstrations, the authorities arranged Gramsci's departure for the small hours of November 19th.
When they came for him, his luggage had to be brought down with him. Since the guards were not prepared to act as servants for prisoners, and since Gramsci was not able to carry his own things, the guards turned to me and said, "You carry these things." So I went out of the prison with the guards, carrying the cases. Outside, there was one of these old-fashioned carriages drawn by a little horse, just like a covered wagon, with people sitting round the sides. We embraced each other. He climbed on to the coach, I put his cases up beside him, and the horse set off down the avenue on the right. It was still dark. I watched as he went off. For a few moments, you could only hear the sound of the horse's hooves. You couldn't see anything at all. I went back to the cell and I found myself crying. I cried for a full half hour, perhaps even longer. I cried like a child at the thought that I'd never seen him again. I cared very deeply for Gramsci.
I felt a terrible sensation of shock after 6 years of seeing nothing but the same roofs, the same high walls, the same grim faces. Now I realized that all this time the great world outside had gone on existing. Its fields, its woods, its ordinary people. These trees here, those orchards over there.
Gramsci's destination was the Cusumano Clinic at Formia, south of Naples, where a further 11 notebooks would be completed. But first he had to endure yet another slow journey through the Mezzogiorno to Rome and beyond. Devastated by a combination of heart, respiratory and digestive diseases, he was hospitalized for a time in the transit prison of Civitavecchia, where his old comrade from the Ordine Nuovo days, Battista Santia, saw him again.
Una guardia carceraria sarda.
There was a Sardinian prison guard. Since he knew who I was, he came up to me and said, "If you do what I tell you, I let you see Gramsci. But you must not speak. You can only signal to each other. Otherwise, I'll end up in your place." And that's what happened. Gramsci was at one window and I at another, but positioned in such a way that we could hardly even see one another. However, we were allowed to go out for an hour, half an hour, for a walk each day. And as we were going out, there was a point where our paths would cross. And I used to pretend that something was wrong so that we managed to meet, but without touching each other. We waved to one another from a distance. That was the last time I saw him, but he was already ill, very far down.
Molto ammalato, era molto giù.
In 1935, with growing international pressure for his release, Gramsci was transferred from Formia to the Quisisana Clinic in Rome. The end came in 1937.
Nino suffered a cerebral hemorrhage on the evening of April 25th. That same day, I had brought him a statement by the Office of Surveillance to the effect that as soon as the period of conditional liberty was up, there would be no more security measures taken against him. 24 hours after the first attack, the vomiting began again, and his breathing became terribly painful. I kept watch over him all the time, wetting his lips, trying to help his breathing when it seemed to be faltering. But then he took a last deep breath and sank into a silence that could never change. When I called the doctor, he confirmed my fear that it was all over. The time was 4:10 a.m. on the 27th. At 5:15, the sisters carried the body to the mortuary chamber.
Had he survived beyond the period of provisional liberty, Gramsci had planned to go back to Sardinia, where his father was still alive, and where two of his sisters were bringing up their families. His mother had died in 1932. In 1928, on the eve of his trial, Gramsci had written to her.
For the sake of my own peace of mind, I would like you not to be too frightened or upset. I would like you to understand and to feel that I am a political prisoner, and that I have nothing to be ashamed of, and never will have anything to be ashamed of. I would like you to understand that in a certain sense, I have myself wished to be imprisoned and condemned, because I would not change my opinions, and indeed would be willing to give up my life for them. But I could not do otherwise. Life is like this, very hard. And sons must sometimes cause great grief to their mothers if they wish to preserve their honor and dignity as men.
Ogni dia un mentende in misura che crescendo, se disandato l'infasto a misura che sul gasto, la sete economia, la sete economia. O povero de esa vida, trabagliate, trabagliate, pro mantenere in città, tanto scalo de installa, tanto scalo de installa. Tanto scalo de installa, a voi la sasavalla, i sorra con le sudano, pensansero a manzano, solamente a ingrassare, solamente a ingrassare. Solamente a ingrassare, baronessa di tirannia. Procurate, procurate, procurate moderare, procurate moderare. Baronessa di tirannia, procurate moderare.
In a few minutes' time, some of the issues raised by Gramsci's work are discussed in relation to modern British socialism, and more particularly how his ideas might contribute to a revival of the left. The contributors include Professor Stuart Hall and the MP John Reed. Gramsci, Here and Now, next on 4.